The warning before the stories: some stories scare you because of what happened. Others scare you because, no matter how many times you turn them over in your head, they should not exist at all. That is the part that stays with me. Not the screaming, not the running, not even the moment when someone realizes they are alone and something is wrong. Those things are frightening, of course. But the stories that bother me most are the ones with one small detail that refuses to fit. A detail that sits quietly in the corner of the memory, waiting for you to notice it days later, when you are brushing your teeth or trying to fall asleep. And once you notice it, the whole story changes. The 3 stories I am about to tell all have that kind of detail. In the first one, someone says a name they had no possible way of knowing. Not a guess, not something overheard. A name spoken calmly in the dark, by a stranger who should never have been there in the first place. In the second, an empty place starts behaving as if someone is still living inside it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make the person nearby question whether they are hearing old pipes, neighbors, or something waiting behind the locked door. And in the third, a voice comes through something that should not have been working. A simple sound, in a quiet house, asking a question that feels harmless until the person hearing it realizes the voice knows exactly where they are. I know how these sound at first. Like late-night stories people pass around because they want to scare each other. Like something exaggerated after being repeated too many times. I thought that too, at least for a while. But what makes them difficult to dismiss is how ordinary they begin. A drive home, an apartment hallway, a house-sitting job. Nothing about those situations should feel dangerous. They are the kinds of places where your mind relaxes because you already understand the rules. Roads have other drivers. Apartments have neighbors. Old houses make strange noises. Most of the time, there is an explanation. But every now and then, something happens that does not behave like an explanation is waiting for it. If quiet, it is almost normal. And that is why it works. Because the people in these stories did not know they were stepping into danger. They were not looking for it. They were not exploring abandoned buildings or chasing rumors in the woods. They were doing normal things, on normal nights, until one small piece of reality shifted just enough for them to feel it. The worst part is not that they were afraid. The worst part is how close they came to ignoring it. Because if they had looked away 1 second sooner, if they had convinced themselves nothing was wrong, they might never have understood how much danger was standing beside them. Story 1. The man at the empty gas station. The first story happened after a family dinner that ran much later than I expected. I had driven out to see my aunt and uncle. The kind of visit that was supposed to end before dark but slowly stretched into coffee. Old stories. And everyone standing by the door, saying goodbye for another 20 minutes. By the time I finally pulled away from their house, it was already close to midnight. The drive home was not unfamiliar, but it was one of those long rural routes where the road seems to narrow after dark. During the day, it was peaceful. Fields on both sides, scattered farmhouses, mailboxes leaning near ditches. But at night, with no lights and barely cars, it felt different. The headlights only showed me a small piece of the road at a time, and everything beyond them disappeared into blackness. I remember checking my phone about 15 minutes into the drive and seeing one weak bar flicker in and out. That did not worry me much at first. Signet was always bad out there. I had music playing low, Tiiter on, and I was mostly just trying to stay awake without making the drive feel longer than it already was. Then the gaslight came on. It made that soft little chime, and for some reason it sounded louder than it should have. I glanced down, and saw I had less than 20 miles left. I knew there was a larger town farther ahead, but I was not completely sure I could make it there. So when I saw the glow of a gas station sign up ahead, I felt relieved. It sat alone off the side of the road, just beyond a bend, with nothing around it except a thin line of trees and an empty 2-lane highway. The sign was old, a faded plastic sign that buzzes faintly when the lights are on. From the road, it looked open. The canopy lights were bright. The pumps were lit. There was even a small open sign glowing red in the front window. I pulled in without thinking. At first, I was grateful. I parked beside the closest pump, turned off the engine, and sat there for a second, letting the silence settle around me. That was when I noticed how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. Not normal late-night quiet. Empty quiet. There were no other cars at the pumps. No truck parked near the side. No delivery van. No radio playing from inside the store. Even the usual hum of refrigerators and fluorescent lights seemed missing, like the whole place had been muted. I looked through the front windows toward the counter. The lights were on inside, but I could not see anyone behind the register. There were shelves, a coffee machine, a rack of chips near the door, all arranged like a regular gas station. But no cashier. No customer. No movement. For a moment, I considered leaving. But the pump screen was on, And when I put my card in, it accepted it right away. That made me feel stupid for hesitating. Maybe the clerk was in the bathroom. Maybe they were stocking something in the back. Maybe I was just tired of making an empty gas station feel stranger than it was. So I started pumping gas. The sound of it clicking and flowing into the tank was the only real noise around me. I kept one hand in my jacket pocket and looked around while the numbers climbed. Across the lot, near the far edge where the pavement met the dark grass, I noticed a man standing with his back to me. At first, I thought he was using another pump. Then I realized there was no car beside him. He was just standing there, facing the trees. Still, he knew my name for a few seconds. I just watched him. I remembered telling myself there had to be a simple reason for it. Maybe he had walked from the store. Maybe his car was parked around the side where I could not see it. Maybe he was on the phone and had turned away for privacy. The human brain does that when something feels wrong. It starts building explanations faster than fear can form. But there was no phone in his hand. He was wearing a dark coat that hung almost to his knees, and his arms were loose at his sides. He did not shift his weight. He did not scratch his face or look around or do any of the small movements people make when they are waiting. He stood so still that, for one ridiculous moment, I wondered if he was some kind of display or cutout left near the edge of the lot. Then he turned around. Not quickly. Not like someone startled. He turned slowly, as if he already knew I was looking at him and had simply decided it was time to look back. I looked down immediately, pretending to check the pump. The numbers were still moving. Too slowly. I could hear the gas running into my tank, steady and normal, and somehow that made everything around it feel less normal. Then he said my name, just my first name. He did not shout it. He said it in a calm voice, clear enough that it crossed the empty parking lot without effort. For half a second, my mind refused to accept it. I told myself I had misheard him. Maybe he had said, "Hey man," or something close to it. Maybe the wind had twisted the sound. But there was no wind. Primera looked up. He was facing me now, standing in the same place, his face partly hidden by the shadow of the canopy lights. I could see enough to know he was older than me, maybe in his 50s, with a narrow face and a blank, patient expression. Then he said it again. My name. This time, there was no way to pretend. My hand tightened around the pump handle. I wanted to ask how he knew me, but my mouth felt dry, and some quiet instinct told me not to give him anything. Not a question, not a reaction. Not proof that he had hit the right nerve. So I forced myself to look irritated instead of scared. "Do I know you?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly, like the question interested him, but not enough to answer. "You should not have stopped here tonight," he said. His voice was flat, almost polite. That was the worst part. He did not sound angry, or drunk, or excited. He sounded like someone giving directions. I glanced toward the store, hoping to see the cashier appear behind the counter. Maybe laughing, maybe annoyed, maybe anything human. But the inside looked exactly the same as before. Bright lights, empty aisles. No one at the register. The pump clicked off, and I nearly jumped. I pulled the nozzle out too quickly, and splashed a few drops of gas onto the side of my car. My hands were clumsy as I put it back. I kept waiting to hear footsteps, but the man did not move. While I reached for the receipt, my eyes went back to the store windows. That was when I noticed the security monitor behind the counter. It was on. For little camera feeds glowed on the screen. One showed the front door. One showed the snack aisle. One showed the pumps from above. The fourth showed my car, but not from the station. It was an angle from behind me, low and close, like a camera was sitting somewhere in the back seat, looking through the windshield at my hands. I froze. My keys were in my pocket. My car was locked except for the driver's door, and I was standing right beside it. Then the man spoke again. The question landed colder than the night air around my car. "Did you come alone?" The car that followed without headlights. I did not answer him. I just opened my door, got in, and locked it so hard the sound cracked through the car. For 1 second, I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, trying not to look at the security monitor, trying not to look at the man. Then I started the engine and pulled away. In the rearview mirror I saw him still standing at the edge of the lot. He had not moved closer. He had not waved. He simply watched as my taillights swept across the empty pumps and the station slipped behind me. For the first mile, I told myself he was unstable. Maybe he had heard my name from somewhere earlier. Maybe my wallet had been visible when I used my card. Maybe the camera screen had been showing some reflection I misunderstood. I repeated those explanations until they almost sounded reasonable. But I could not explain why the station felt empty, in a way buildings should not feel empty. The road ahead was black, except for the narrow tunnel made by my headlights. I kept checking my mirrors, even though there was nothing behind me at first. Just darkness, road, and white posts flashing past the shoulder. On a long curve, I saw it, a shape behind me. No headlights, no glow, just the dark outline of a vehicle drifting along the bend, far enough back that I almost missed it. At first, I thought it was a shadow from the trees, but when the road straightened, the shape stayed on the pavement. My stomach went cold. I pressed the gas a little. The shape remained distant, but it did not disappear. Primera slow it down. It's slow. I told myself again that I was imagining patterns because I was already afraid, so I did something simple. At the next county road, I turned left, even though I knew it was not the way home. The vehicle turned left. That was the moment the fear stopped being something I could argue with. I drove faster, not recklessly, but fast enough that the tires hummed louder under me. My phone was on the passenger seat, flickering between one bar and no service. I kept glancing at it, then back at the mirror, then at the road, terrified I would miss a curve and end up in a ditch. The vehicle never came close. That was almost worse. It followed with patience, like whoever was inside knew I had nowhere useful to go. A few minutes later, I saw a small white church set back from the road. Its sign was dark. The gravel parking lot was empty. I remembered passing it during daylight, years before, and without thinking, I turned in hard enough for gravel to spit under my tires. I killed the headlights but left the engine running. My plan was stupid and desperate. I thought the other vehicle would keep going, and I would prove to myself it was not following me after all. Instead, it stopped at the entrance. No lights, no engine noise I could hear. Just that black shape sitting between the road and the church lot, blocking the only way out. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. The call connected, then broke into static. A woman's voice said something I could not understand. I whispered my location, or what I thought my location was, but every other word seemed to vanish. He kept saying someone is following me, and I'm at a church. But the phone kept cutting out, turning panic into broken pieces. The vehicle sat there. Then it began to roll forward. I remember the exact feeling in my chest, like my heart had become too large for my ribs. I put the car in reverse, ready to drive across the grass if I had to. But before it entered the lot, it stopped. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then it reversed back onto the road and disappeared into the dark, still without turning on its headlights. I stayed there until a deputy found me, 20 minutes later. The next morning, I looked up the gas station because I wanted to prove I had not invented it. What I found made the whole night worse. It had been closed for renovation for 3 weeks. No working pumps, no overnight staff, no lights. At least, there should not have been. Some places remember you. I think that is what makes the first story so hard to sit with. Not just the man, not just the car without headlights. Those parts are frightening, but they still belong to a world I understand. People can be dangerous. People can follow you. People can say things that make your skin crawl and still be people. But the gas station is the part that does not let the story close. Because if it was really closed, then what did they pull into that night? What lights were shining over those pumps? What machine accepted the card? What security monitor showed an angle from inside a locked car? And if there was no cashier, no staff, no working equipment, then who made the place look open long enough for one tired driver to stop? That is where fear changes shape. It stops being about escaping a stranger and becomes about realizing the place itself may have been part of the trap. Or worse, that the place was never waiting for anyone in particular. It was there, open when it should not have been, ready for whoever needed gas. There are places that feel wrong only after you leave them. In the moment your mind smooths over the details. You tell yourself the silence is normal. The empty counter is normal. The person standing too still is just someone you do not want to judge. Then later, safe in your own home, the details come back one by one, and they no longer fit. The next story is different, but it carries that same feeling. It is not about a remote road or a lonely gas station where no one can hear you. It happens somewhere more familiar, an apartment building. The kind of place where you recognize your neighbor's door, the elevator cable shifting, the pipes knocking in the walls. A place where every hallway should feel known. But sometimes the places closest to us are the easiest to misunderstand. Sometimes an empty room is not as empty as everyone keeps telling you. Story 2. The apartment across the hall. I lived on the 3rd floor of a small apartment building that never felt completely quiet, even when everyone was asleep. It was not a bad place. The rent was reasonable. The locks worked, and most of the neighbors kept to themselves in that polite way people do when they share walls, but not lives. We nodded in the hallway. We held the front door if someone was carrying groceries. Beyond that, nobody asked too many questions. Across from my apartment was Unit 3B. For the first few months I lived there, someone occupied it. I never knew him well. He was a thin man in his 30s, always wearing the same gray hoodie, always looking as if he had somewhere to be but had forgotten where. Then one weekend he was gone. No moving truck, no goodbye, just his doormat missing, his blinds pulled down, and a handwritten notice taped to the door for a few days. After that, the landlord told me the unit was empty. I believed him, because there was no reason not to. Empty apartments have a certain feeling to them. No smells from cooking, no television through the wall, no footsteps when you are making dinner. For a while, 3B had exactly that kind of absence. Then, late one night, I heard something scrape. It was soft, almost delicate, like a chair leg being dragged an inch across bare floor. I was in bed, half asleep, and at first I thought it came from upstairs. Old buildings carry sound strangely. Pipes knock, wood shifts. Someone closes a cabinet on another floor, and it sounds like it happened beside your head. So I ignored it. A few nights later, it happened again. This time I was awake, sitting on my couch with the lights off, watching something on my laptop. The sound came from across the hall, not above me. A slow drag, then a pause, then a small thump, like furniture settling. I muted my laptop and listened. Nothing. That was what bothered me. If it had continued, I might have accepted it as plumbing or maintenance, or a neighbor I had mistaken for the empty apartment. But the sound stopped the moment I listened for it, as if whoever made it had realized I was paying attention. The next morning, I called the landlord. He sounded distracted, like I was interrupting him in the middle of something, and told me nobody had been inside 3B for weeks. He said maintenance had not come by, and he was still waiting to repaint before showing it again. When I mentioned the noise, he laughed lightly and said, "These walls are older than both of us. You're probably hearing the pipes." I wanted to believe that. For the next week, I tried to train myself not to react. When I heard a cabinet click shut after midnight, I kept brushing my teeth. When I heard 2 soft steps pause near the shared wall, I turned my fan higher. When the hallway floor creaked outside my door, I waited until morning to check. But the strangest part was the timing. Whenever I opened my front door, the sound stopped. Not faded, not moved away. Stopped. I would step into the hallway and stand there facing 3B, staring at its plain brown door, its dead peephole, its dark gap underneath. The air always felt slightly colder there. Not enough to prove anything. Just enough that I noticed. Then one night, around 1 a.m., I heard something new. A phone vibrating. It was pressed somewhere against the other side of the wall, buzzing in short, desperate bursts. I stood there in the dark, barely breathing, because the sound was not coming from upstairs anymore. It was right beside me, close enough to feel intentional, and far too steady to be accidental. The note under the door, the phone buzzed 3 times, stopped, then buzzed again. I stood with my palm against the wall, feeling the vibration faintly through the paint. It was so clear that for a second I almost knocked, the way you would if a neighbor's alarm was going off too long. Then, I remembered there was no neighbor. The sound ended after maybe a minute. I slept with the lamp on that night, or tried to. Every time the building settled, my eyes opened. I kept expecting another vibration, another scrape, another careful step from the other side. But nothing came. By morning, the apartment felt ordinary again, which somehow made the night feel embarrassing. Then, I found the note. It had been pushed under my front door while I slept. A single piece of white paper folded once, lying just inside my entryway where the hallway light made a thin line across it. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up, because I already knew. In that quiet way, your body knows things before your mind agrees, that I was not going to like what was written there. Inside, there was only one sentence. "Please stop listening." The handwriting was uneven and shaky, pressed so hard into the paper that I could feel the letters on the back. There was no name, no explanation, nothing else. For a while, anger came before fear. I told myself someone in the building was messing with me. Maybe the landlord had mentioned my call. Maybe a neighbor had heard me opening my door at night and thought it would be funny to scare the person who lived alone. I even checked the hallway, hoping to catch someone nearby, but it was empty. The only door facing mine was 3B. Its gap at the bottom was dark. The old brass number looked dull in the morning light. I crouched and looked closer, not sure what I expected to find. There was dust gathered along the threshold, except for a faint streak in the center, like something thin had been slid out from underneath. I called the landlord again. This time, I did not try to sound casual. I told him about the phone, the note, and the noises. I told him if the apartment was empty, then someone had a key. And if someone had a key, that was his problem, as much as mine. He sighed, annoyed at first. But when I offered to send a photo, his voice changed. He said he would come by the next morning and open the unit. That night was the longest night I spent in that apartment. I moved my couch away from the shared wall and sat on it with the television on mute. Around 12:40, the whispering started. It was too low to understand, not words exactly, more like breath shaped into words, a soft murmur sliding through the wall. I turned the television off, and the sound stopped. I turned it back on, waited, then muted it again. The whispering returned. I do not know why I did what I did next. Maybe because fear becomes easier when you can turn it into proof. I walked to the wall, leaned in slowly, and pressed my ear against it. On the other side, something breathed. Not from across a room. Right there. Inches? Hawaii. I jerked back so hard, I hit the coffee table behind me. The whispering stopped immediately, and the rest of the night passed in a silence that felt deliberate. The landlord arrived at 9 the next morning with a ring of keys and a maintenance worker. He unlocked 3B. While I stood behind them, arms crossed over my chest, the door opened onto an empty apartment. No furniture, no phone, no boxers, nothing but bare floors, blank walls, and dusty sunlight through closed blinds. The landlord walked through every room, opening closets and cabinets with a look that said he wanted me to feel foolish, and I almost did. Then, as we were leaving, I saw it. On the inside of the front door, pressed into dust, was a handprint. The wrong reflection after the landlord left. I stood in the hallway for almost a full minute, staring at the closed door of 3B. He had laughed it off before leaving, not loudly, and not cruelly, but in that forced way people laugh when they want a situation to become ordinary again. He said dust held all kinds of marks. He said the maintenance guy had probably touched the inside of the door without realizing it. He said I needed sleep. Maybe he was right. That was what I kept telling myself as I went back into my apartment and locked the door. I checked the chain twice. Then I checked the deadbolt. Then I stood there with my hands still on the knob, listening. Nothing moved across the hall. For the first time in days, there were no footsteps, no scraping, no quiet vibration through the wall. The silence should have helped, but it felt too complete, like the building was holding its breath. I tried to make the evening normal. I made coffee even though it was late. I answered a few messages. I turned on every light in the apartment, then felt ridiculous, and turned half of them off again. But the place felt different now, as if opening 3B had changed the hallway itself. Whenever I passed my front door, I could see the peephole from the corner of my eye. It looked darker than usual. I know that sounds stupid. A peephole is just a tiny circle of glass. But that night, it did not look like glass. It looked like a small black spot someone had painted over from the other side. Around 11, I checked the hallway. The light above the stairs flickered once as soon as I opened the door. Across from May 3B looked slightly wrong. The door was closed, but not sitting flush in the frame anymore. One edge leaned out just enough to make a thin shadow line near the lock, like it had been opened and closed too many times in a hurry. I shut my door quietly. I did not sleep. I lay on my couch under a blanket, facing the front door, with my phone in my hand. Sometime after 2, I heard 3 soft knocks. Not from the hallway, from my bathroom. At first, I thought a pipe had ticked in the wall. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. It was hollow and delicate, like fingernails tapping glass. I stood up slowly, every part of me arguing against it, and walked down the short hall toward the bathroom. The door was open. The light was off. In the dark, the mirror above the sink held a dim rectangle of gray from the living room behind me. I reached in and flipped the switch. My reflection appeared. For 1 second, everything looked normal. My pale face, my messy hair, my hand still on the switch. Then my reflection's eyes shifted. Not much, just slightly past my shoulder, toward the hallway behind me. I turned around so fast my shoulder hit the doorframe. There was no one there. The hall was empty. The front door was shut. The chain was still locked. But when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was staring at me again, perfectly still, as if it had never moved at all. That was when I saw the paper on the counter, folded once. White, sitting beside the sink, where there had been nothing a moment before. I did not touch it at first. I backed out of the bathroom, grabbed my keys, and opened my front door. The hallway light was steady now. 3B was closed. I could hear my own breathing louder than anything else. The strange thing was, the apartment behind me felt occupied now, like someone had quietly stepped inside while I looked away. right there in the dark hallway. Only after I had my shoes on did I unfold the note. Now, you heard it too. I left that night and stayed with a friend until I found another place. Weeks later, I learned something the landlord had not told me. The man who lived in 3B had never officially moved out. He had disappeared before signing the final paperwork, leaving his lease unresolved and most of his belongings gone. Nobody knew where he went, and after hearing that, I understood the note differently. It was not a warning, it sounded like relief. The fear of almost understanding what bothers me most about the second story is that nothing ever steps into view. There is no face at the window. No stranger, caught on camera. No clear moment where anyone can point and say, "There, that is what it was." Instead, there are only signs. A note under a door, a breath through a wall, a reflection looking where it should not look. That kind of fear is harder to explain to other people. If someone breaks into your apartment, people understand why you are afraid. If someone follows you down a street, they understand why you run. But when the fear is made of almosts, it becomes slippery. You almost heard words. You almost saw movement. You almost understood what was trying to reach you. And then the proof disappears. That is what makes it lonely. You are left holding small details that sound weak when you say them out loud, but feel unbearable when you remember how they happened. The exact pause before the whisper stopped. The coldness in the hallway, the way a blank apartment somehow felt aware of you. I think the person in that story was not just scared because someone might have been across the hall. They were scared because, for a moment, they felt included in something they were never supposed to know about. That is worse than being watched. Being watched means something has noticed you. Being included means it expects you to respond. And maybe that is why the final story unsettles me even more. Because it does not begin with footsteps or notes or anything you can blame on neighbors, wiring, or an old building. It begins with a voice. A voice coming from a device that should have been harmless. The kind of voice you hear in the dark and instantly want to explain away as interference. A bad signal, some leftover piece of technology, picking up another house nearby. But explanations only work until the voice says something it should not know, and by then, you are already listening. Story 3. The baby monitor in the house with no baby. The third story was sent to me by someone who had taken a house-sitting job for an older couple outside town. They said the couple seemed completely normal, friendly, organized. The kind of people who left handwritten instructions on the kitchen counter and apologies twice for the house being too quiet. They were going away for a long weekend to visit their daughter, and all they needed was someone to feed the cat, bring in the mail, water the plants near the back window, and keep the porch light on after dark. That was it. The house itself sat at the end of a narrow road, with woods behind it, and only one neighbor close enough to see through the trees. It was not creepy in an obvious way. During the day, it actually felt warm. Clean carpets, family photos on the walls, old books in the hallway. A kitchen that smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and tea, but it was also outdated in the way older houses sometimes are. There were heavy curtains, a landline phone, a cabinet full of VHS tapes, and a closet in the guest room stacked with old electronics. Nothing strange by itself, just little reminders that the house had been lived in for decades. The first evening passed quietly. The cat, a heavy orange thing named Milton, followed them from room to room but refused to be touched. They made dinner, watched television for a while, and checked the locks before going upstairs to the guest room. That was when they noticed the baby monitor. It was sitting on a high shelf beside a box of tangled cords and old remotes. One of those older plastic monitors, yellowed slightly with age, with a speaker grill on the front and a tiny red power light near the bottom. There was no baby in the house, obviously. The couple were grandparents. Their children were grown, so the narrator assumed it was just something that had been forgotten there, maybe left from when the grandchildren were younger. They almost put it back in the closet. Instead, they left it on the shelf and went to bed. They said they woke up sometime in the middle of the night without knowing why. The room was dark, except for a weak line of moonlight along the curtains. For a few seconds, everything was still. Then the baby monitor crackled. Not loudly, just a dry little burst of static. They opened their eyes and stared at the shelf. The red power light was on. At first, they thought they must have bumped the switch earlier. Then they remembered they had not touched it, only noticed it. The static came again, longer this time, fading in and out, like someone breathing too close to a microphone. They sat up slowly. The house around them was silent. No footsteps, no television, no pipes knocking. Even the cat was nowhere in sight. Then a voice came through the monitor. Soft, thin, almost swallowed by the static. "Are you awake?" They did not move. For a moment, Their mind reached for every harmless explanation it could find. Maybe the monitor was picking up a neighbor's signal. Maybe some old radio frequency crossed through the speakers. Maybe another family nearby had a baby monitor on the same channel. But the nearest house was barely visible through the trees. And the voice had sounded close. They checked the clock on their phone. 2:13 a.m., the monitor hissed again. This time, the voice said the same question, but added their name at the end. Not a nickname. Not a word that sounded similar. Their actual name. Spoken softly in the dark, from a room that should not have been listening. And the voice sounded patient, like it had been waiting for them to wake up. The room upstairs, they kept staring at the monitor as if it might explain itself. The voice did not speak again right away. Only static filled the room, soft and uneven, broken by little sounds that almost formed patterns. A breath, a scrape, something like fabric shifting against the microphone. They turned on the bedside lamp. The guest room looked smaller with the light on. The floral wallpaper, the old dresser, the neat stack of folded towels at the foot of the bed. Everything was ordinary, which made the monitor feel even more out of place, sitting on that shelf with its red light glowing like a tiny eye. They picked it up without thinking, then nearly dropped it when the speaker popped. For a while, they just listened. If there was one monitor in the guest room, there had to be another one somewhere else. That was how those old systems worked. One unit listened, the other carried the sound, so they told themselves the answer was simple. Somewhere in the house. The second piece had been left on too. Maybe it was in a closet. Maybe it was beside an old crib in storage. Maybe a battery inside it was dying and doing strange things. The name was harder to explain. They chose not to think about that part yet. They checked the guest room closet first, moving aside winter coats, cardboard boxers, and an old vacuum cleaner. Nothing. Then the hallway linen cabinet. Nothing but sheets, towels, and a plastic tub filled with Christmas lights. Downstairs, they opened kitchen drawers, the laundry room cabinets, even the space behind the television where old cords were bundled together with bread ties. The whole time, the monitor kept crackling in their hand. Sometimes it was only static. Sometimes there was breathing, slow enough that it could have been interference if they were willing to lie to themselves. Once, while they stood in the downstairs hallway, there came a faint tapping sound. 3 taps, a pause. Then 3 more. They looked toward the ceiling. The sound had not come from the monitor alone. They heard it above them too, muted by floorboards, somewhere near the back of the upstairs hall. That was when they remembered what the couple had said before leaving. There is one room at the end of the hall we keep locked. Just storage. Nothing you need to worry about. At the time, it had sounded normal. Every house had a locked closet, a cluttered office, a room full of things nobody wanted a stranger looking through. But standing at the bottom of the stairs with the baby monitor hissing in their hand, that memory felt different. They went upstairs slowly. The hall was dark except for the guest room lamp spilling light behind them. At the far end was the locked storage room. Plain white door, brass knob, no name, no decoration, nothing special about it. Except now, there was light underneath. A thin yellow line showed at the bottom, barely brighter than moonlight, but definitely there. They stopped halfway down the hall. The baby monitor crackled again. A breath came through the speaker. Then a small sound like someone shifting in a chair. They whispered, "Hello?" The house did not answer. They took another step, then another, until they were standing directly outside the storage room. Their hand hovered near the knob, though they knew it was locked. The light beneath the door seemed steady now, warm and impossible. Then the voice came through the monitor. "Don't open it yet." They backed away so fast their shoulder hit the wall. What terrified them was not just the words. It was the timing. The voice had spoken at the exact moment they were reaching for the door, as if whoever was on the other end could see their hand. They called the couple immediately. No answer. They called again. Then again. Each time it rang, until voicemail. Downstairs, the house creaked once, settling or listening. They decided they were leaving. Then Milton appeared at the end of the hall. The cat stared at the locked door, arched his back, and began to hiss loudly. The voice from the other side, the cat's hiss, broke something in them. Until then, they had been trying to move carefully, trying not to make the house feel more alive than it already did. But the sound of Milton hissing at that locked door made everything simple. Whatever was happening, they no longer wanted to understand it. They grabbed their phone, the baby monitor, and their car keys from the guest room. The monitor was still in their hand, still whispering static against their palm. They almost left it on the bed, but some part of them was afraid that if they put it down, the voice would start speaking from somewhere else. They went down the stairs quickly, keeping one hand on the banister because their legs felt weak. The house seemed different now. Larger, deeper. Every dark doorway on the first floor looked like it had been waiting for them to pass. At the bottom of the stairs, Milton ran ahead, then stopped near the living room entrance and stared toward the front door. The porch light was on outside, glowing through the small frosted window beside the door. That should have been comforting. They could see the outline of the porch rail, the pale rectangle of the welcome mat, the black shape of the yard beyond it. They reached for the deadbolt. The monitor crackled, then the voice said, "That's not outside." Their hand froze on the lock. For a few seconds, they could not make sense of the words. Not outside. It sounded like a warning, but also like a correction. They leaned slowly toward the little window beside the door and looked through the blurred glass. Someone was standing on the porch, not facing the house, facing away. The figure was only a few feet from the door, shoulders slightly hunched, head lowered toward the steps. The porch light fell directly over them, but somehow the person looked flat and dark, like the light refused to land properly. They were standing so still that, at first, the narrator thought it might be a coat hanging from the rail. Then the figure shifted one hand. Just slightly, they backed away from the door and locked the deadbolt again. Then the chain. Their fingers fumbled so badly they had to try twice. The monitor hissed softly, almost satisfied. They called 911. This time, the call went through. They whispered their address from the note on the refrigerator, trying to keep their voice steady, telling the dispatcher someone was on the porch and something was wrong inside the house. The dispatcher told them to stay away from the doors and windows, to remain on the line, and to find a room they could lock. They moved into the kitchen, crouched beside the counter, and held the phone against one ear and the monitor near the other. That was when they heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, heavy, crossing the hallway above them. The dispatcher kept asking questions, but they could barely answer. The footsteps stopped over the kitchen. Then came the sound they still say they remember more clearly than anything else. A door opening, not the front door. The locked storage room upstairs. It made a long wooden groan, followed by a soft click, like a latch giving way after years of staying shut. Milton bolted under the table, the baby monitor filled with breathing. Then, from the speaker, very close, the voice whispered, "Now." Red and blue lights finally swept across the windows. When the police arrived, no one was on the porch, no footprints, no vehicle, no sign that anyone had stood there at all. Inside, they checked every room while the narrator waited outside wrapped in a blanket they did not remember accepting. The storage room was still locked. The couple came home early the next morning, shaken and confused. With police present, they opened the room. It was packed with boxers, old clothes, picture frames, and dust. In the center of the room sat a small wooden chair. On the chair was the missing second baby monitor, plugged into the wall, facing the door. The couple swore they had never seen it before. The strange part was how clean it looked, while every box around it carried the same gray dust, like someone had placed it there recently, carefully. Later, an electrician confirmed the outlet had not worked in years, and when someone opened the monitor, there were no batteries inside. The details that shouldn't exist, that is the part I keep coming back to with these stories. Not the obvious fear, not the stranger at the gas station, or the whispering apartment, or the figure on the porch. Those details are terrifying, but they are not the reason these stories stay in your mind after they are over. It is the smaller things. The gas station that should have been dark, locked, and silent, somehow glowing on the side of the road at the exact moment someone needed fuel. The pump that worked. The monitor that showed an angle no camera should have had. The man who knew a name before he was ever given one. Then there is the apartment across the hall. Empty for months, according to everyone who should have known. No tenant, no furniture, no phone, and still, something inside it moved softly enough to be doubted, but clearly enough to be remembered. Something listened. Something wrote back. Something seemed relieved when someone else finally heard it too. And then the house, with no baby. A monitor that should have been harmless. A voice that waited until the room was dark. A locked storage room with light under the door. A second device sitting clean in the dust, plugged into an outlet that had not worked in years. Without batteries, without reason, without any explanation that fits the world we believe we live in. Maybe each story has an answer. Maybe the gas station had illegal power running somehow. Maybe someone had been hiding in that apartment. Maybe the monitor picked up some strange combination of signals and fear filled in the rest. That is what we tell ourselves, because the alternative is harder to sleep with. The alternative is that sometimes ordinary places are not as stable as they appear. Sometimes a road, a hallway, or an old house can feel normal, until one detail shifts slightly out of place. Not enough for everyone to see it. Just enough for one person to notice. And maybe noticing is the dangerous part. Because in every one of these stories, the moment things became truly frightening was not when the danger appeared. It was when the person understood that something was aware of them understanding. A stranger turned around. An empty apartment answered. A voice spoke at the exact second it should not have known anyone was listening. So maybe the most disturbing stories are not about monsters at all. Maybe they are about those brief moments when reality slips. Quietly, almost politely, and something on the other side realizes you saw it happen. And once it knows that, maybe it starts watching back.